The first thing I wanted to ask you was, it was kind of, I remember you mentioned it was kind of like a love story, like a platonic love story, obviously.
So, well, you don't want to start anything right now, right?
Exactly, no rumors, you know. But talk about like how Bird and Magic needed each other.
Well, it's a love story in the sense that these are two guys that, for all their differences and for all their, in life, on and off the court, they were basketball players first and foremost. I think from the time when they were, little kids. And I think it's a love story in my mind in the sense that, the story started in 1978, when they played on this team that very few people knew about. They played on this World Invitational team, it's a national team.
And sorry to interrupt, it was kind of equivalent to the World Basketball Championships. That
more or less, exactly. It's a little bit, it doesn't exist anymore. And, it was after Magic's freshman year in college. So he's 18, 19 years old, and Bird is a little old, is 3 years older than Magic, and so he was a little older. He's going into his senior year. So this is before kind of people understand their rivalry to have started. And they both sat on the bench because they were playing for Joe B. Hall as the Kentucky coach, and they had just come off of winning the national championship, and he wanted to play a lot of his guys. But what's funny is for Bird and Magic, who have nothing in common, don't really know each other, they immediately connect by just looking at that other guy on the court and saying, like, wait a second, he plays like I play. And the other guy says, he plays like I play. And I think they picked up on that right away. And the fact that, okay, so their stories, they go off and they end up playing in this national championship game the next year, and they have this rivalry where there's a lot of components to their relationship. But in the end, fundamentally, they're the same dude when it came to playing basketball. And so with all the kind of ups and downs of their rivalry, and that, yes, they didn't like each other, and there's a lot of things to it, at its core, it's two guys that they needed each other, and they obsessed about each other, and they always wanted to beat each other, and they measured each other, by the other. So the love story is that in the end, with all the stuff that was going on outside of them, culturally, with their teams, with the media, that I think it's like these guys cared about each other more than anyone realized at the time. And it was almost like they had this connection. I almost think of it as spiritually. It's, when there's two guys who can do something better than anyone else on earth can do it, I feel like that connects you in a way that a lot of people can't possibly really understand, and certainly I can't understand it. But in the end, what you find is like two guys who you never realized how close they were, and it hasn't until really now, even though it kind of was talked about that they became friendly, that I really understood at their core how much they meant to one another.
Magic Johnson came up in a loving household, great family. Larry Bird, on the contrary, was, his father was an alcoholic and he killed himself, and so he had a lot of that strife growing up. So talk about that difference as well, how it affected their relationship too, professionally.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that there's always this nature versus nurture argument, and we never know what, informs a person more. And it's clear that, I mean, Magic grew up in a house, didn't have a lot of money, had, lived in a house where he had, a total of 9 siblings, with the mom and dad, and, lower middle class, dad and mom, both working class, worked their ass off. I don't know if I can say that.
Oh, you can't smoke the asses.
Okay. And so it's not like he came from means, but yeah, you're right. He did come from a very stable household, very loving household, very religious household. I think, I keep coming back to the idea, the word structure. He had that structure. But at the same time, I think that guy popped out of the womb and he was smiling. I think Magic Johnson was Magic Johnson. I mean, I think that's natural. I think that, sure, I mean, he got a lot of love from his parents, and and who knows, when you grow up and you're a big kid and you develop talent and you realize you're good at something, I'm sure that informs your personality too. But Magic Johnson is a force of personality unlike the which we have seen, over the past. He's one of the great characters in sports. So that has nothing to do with his family, in my opinion. By contrast, Larry Bird, so you could make the opposite argument. So he didn't grow up, with the same level of structure. So yes, his dad did have some issues, did drink a lot, had post-traumatic stress from the Korean War, was kind of in and out. Like when he did work, oftentimes he did construction and would leave for a week, wasn't always around. His mom, in turn, worked 2 jobs. And they were him and his brothers were almost like latchkey kids. And they'd be running around. They moved all the time when they were kids. house to house to house, whether it was like trying to avoid the, the creditors trying to, come and get the rent,
Right.
but yet not a lot of stability. And so who knows if Bird's a kid that, because of the circumstance, even in the doc, yeah, we make a point to tell you how little he had, but he probably had less than that. I mean, he grew up pretty dirt poor.
Do you think that's what made him very, very closed to be social?
But I mean, again, it's the same thing with like what his brother says in the doc in the film, that maybe there's probably reasons why he had a certain, if you think, did he have some anger issues, did he have some, but like he also said, the kid was just quiet. The kid kind of is like, he was a little bit withdrawn. So who knows the reasons? And I think Larry Bird, I've kind of been joking around. He's not the kind of guy you're gonna find on the couch of a psychiatrist, to figure out. I don't think Larry's getting on a couch anytime soon. Right. But I do think there are a lot of factors that coming from different places where you could look at and say, well, yeah, the guy had a hard time growing up, so that makes sense. But at the same time, he was very close with his mom, was fiercely protective of her, like throughout her life, and she's now passed. And I think he really did love his dad a lot, even though they had issues. His dad had issues, and I think even the way he talked about him and talks about him to this day, he doesn't talk a lot about him in the sense he doesn't really talk a lot about anything.
Right.
But I don't think he looks back and thinks his dad is someone who, he hates and or destroyed his life and or like, I think he's just, hey, he knows the guy had issues. I'm sure he would have preferred to have an easier time growing up. But I think the guy he's not that introspective in that way. He's just like, whatever, that's the deal. Move on.
The toughness. He had a major chronic back injury that could have crippled so many other players, but he was able to play still another 6 seasons.
Oh, I mean, look, this gets, again, nature versus nurture, but yes, I think if you grew up the way he grew up, as Rick Roby says in the film, he grew up tough. Like, he's just a tough dude. And I think when you've seen certain things and you live through certain things, and you go from being this kid in French Lick, Indiana with nothing, and you're in the NBA and you're thinking, oh, my back's kind of hurting me, and the story he always likes to tell, we've been talking about his father, is his father coming home from working a weekend in construction, and his ankle was swollen, and he could barely walk, but got up on Monday morning, had to go back to work, have to help his dad get the boot back on his foot, and I think that really resonated. I think he has a really old-fashioned work ethic, which is, you just play hurt, man. Right. I got a job to do. I'm getting paid money. I go out and do my job. And he also was a very private guy, so I don't think he had a lot of desire to share his pain. And but yeah, he was a tough guy in a way that I don't think a lot of people these days. I mean, sure, there are a lot of athletes that play. I know all athletes play through pain, especially towards the end of seasons. But I think it'd be unlikely you'd find an athlete who played through the level of pain that he went through the last few years of his career.